So again, if you look on the screen right now, I just found this. All right, that's why it's not on the list of the ones I gave you. But it's an old book. It's 13, 14 years old. That's old for a book. But JavaScript has not changed inherently that much over 14 years. All right. So this is an online definitive guide. If you've never seen a book by O'Reilly before, they're books that were written basically for programmers. All right. I've tried using them before as textbooks in the classroom, and I always give the analogy of mushrooms. Usually if you ask a person about mushrooms, some people will say, they're okay. But usually with most people, they really love them or they just hate them. And that's how most people are with O'Reilly books. They really think, oh man, these are great, or they just can't stand them. And when I do that and I have a class of 20 people and 10 people write down they can't stand the book, I don't want to use that book again. All right. But as it says, it's got 20-some chapters, and it's online. And so if I wanted to know something more about functions, I can just click there, and there's a whole chapter on functions, and that's split up. Now, I want to tell you one more thing. Not on purpose, but I lied to you. Not on purpose. Everything in JavaScript is case sensitive, including function names. I was thinking PHP, because PHP function names are not case sensitive. JavaScript are. So in JavaScript, everything will be basically in lowercase. All right. Anybody remember? Where are we? Right. When we had comments that were like this, see that up there in the blue? Here and here. What are those? What would we use those for comments? What language? CSS. That's a multi-line JavaScript comment. What does that mean? That means that if I wanted to write a comment here, I could write, for example, this will be the best JavaScript program ever. I can do that and put it on multiple lines. That makes sense to everybody? If I didn't want to do that, I could just put // /////////. So 2 forward slashes in a row takes everything from where the 2 forward slashes are to the right and makes it a single line comment. A multi-line comment starts with a /* and ends with a */. Why do you use comments? I'm asking you. Why do you use comments? Clarity, that's a good reason, yeah. Understandability, which is kind of the same thing. If somebody else is going to end up maintaining your program, okay? Why am I asking you that? Because it's on the test. All right. In fact, when you create a comment that looks like this, hint, this is on the test. When you create one that looks like this, where it's multiple lines, that's referred to as a block comment. Okay, not my words, that's just typically what it's referred to as. It's a block or block style. That's on the test. All right. This is typically referred to then just as a single line comment. And what's the good news? That's the same way that you're going to comment in the other languages you're going to learn. C#, Java, boom. That's how they comment in there also. Those have one more type of comment that you can make. I'm not going to even get into those right now. They're special documentation comments. We'll talk about them at another time. So they show you how you can add comments in here. They talk comments with you, why you'd want to add comments, talk about how important it is. But be real leery, because what I've done this. When I was a professional programmer, I did this. I would put comments in my code where I would explain stuff, and that's good. But I would also put tests I ran on the code and what different stuff meant, and I'd comment it out. That way, if the code broke, I could uncomment it again. Does that make sense to everybody? The problem with that is if somebody ever breaks in and is able to steal your code, all right, they can get a hell of a lot of information doing that. There are places that I know of now that do almost no commenting in their code because they're afraid if somebody steals it. I don't know if you know this, but literally, what I'm about to tell you, this is legal. All right? Let's say that Amin creates this really cool program, and I don't have a copy of it. I can't get a copy of it, but I'm able to take the final product of his program and do what's called reverse engineer it and figure out how to do it. And then I want to create something that's virtually identical to it and put it out there. I can do that. As long as I can prove I reverse engineered it, I started with the end and worked my way back to the beginning. Now, if I steal his code and put my name on it, that's against the law. But there have been companies for years that have done that. That's why when you get a patent, it typically expires in a certain number of years. All right, when you patent something and then other people start coming up with the same kind of product. All right, variables. When you write a variable in JavaScript, all right, so if I do this, you already saw this, hello world, have a nice day, etc. But I'm going to come back and I'm going to knock that down just a tad. And I'm going to come in here and say var age equals 0. We talked about this before, but I want you to see this. This is doing two things. It's declaring a variable named age. That should make sense to everybody. It's also initializing that variable. So it's giving it an initial value. If I just do this, technically right there, its value is either null, which means unknown, or undefined. So usually when you create variables, you initialize them. If they're numeric variables and you don't know, you typically initialize them to 0. All right, so I'm going to do the same thing that we had in here before, and I'm going to say, please have a nice day, and then I'm going to put in here a BR, I think it's a BR tag in this language, but we'll find out, plus you are, oops, I need double quotes, all right, so save that, run the program. Of course it wouldn't run, right? Oh, it's because that's what I was testing on that, so that's got to be lowercase. That's on me. So how old are you? Okay, it's not BR, it's a \n. We'll fix that. But you see what I just did? That the important part is not that. The important part is I just showed you, whether you realize it or not, a bunch of stuff about JavaScript, such as, well, document.write writes on the web page. You've already seen that. You use var to declare a variable. You use the equal sign. That equal sign is literally referred to as the assignment operator. It's not the equals operator, because in this language you've got two equals operators. One with 2 equal signs, one with 3 equal signs. We'll get to that. I don't know if it's in this chapter or not. Probably not, but probably in the next chapter. All right. So we are doing two things here. We are declaring a variable right there. We are initializing a variable right there. Does that make sense to everyone? It's typically a two-step process like that. This, again, allows you to write onto the web page. So I can come in here. I don't want to, go too nuts here, but declare, and initialize variable. All right. Write to web page screen. All right. Prompt user for info. Save to variable. All right. Output information. Okay, so I put a bunch of comments in there. You should now understand that. Now, one thing, this is another place where JavaScript, just so you know this, is unbelievably forgiving. What do I mean? See this line where it says var h? Everybody see that? I'm going to take that whole line. What did I just do to that? I commented it out. All right, I commented it out. Let's run the program again. See that? Still worked. Because in JavaScript, if you forget to declare and initialize a variable, it's done for you behind the scenes. You should never do that, because other than JavaScript and PHP, they're the only two languages that I know of that allow you to do that. You try doing that in C# next semester, program breaks. Try doing that in Java, program breaks. So get used to using var. All right, and the only way that I can make sure you do is if you don't, I take off on your programs. All right, use names that are descriptive. You know, right there I could have used a, but that'd be a dumb name because it's not very reflective of what that's doing. All right. Again, right in the web page I think makes sense. This, if I just had this part right there, that part right there, just the part you see in gray. I guess one more character. Oops. If I just had this, okay, it would have still printed the exact same thing on the screen. And it still would have assigned it to age. But if I put 59 in there, it doesn't assign the number 59. It assigns the string 59. And that string has no numerical value in it. So if I was going to ask my age, then I was going to ask Brady his age, and I was going to tell the difference between them. All right, it may or may not work. All right, because I'd be working with strings instead of numbers. So this says, take whatever you put in the prompt statement and convert that into an integer. And hopefully you remember this. We talked about it in an earlier class. Okay, if I come in here and write this and say, none of your business, and I hit enter, what's age going to be set to? Does anybody remember?
0.
No, not 0. What? N-A-N, not a number. Capital N, lowercase a, capital N. So you see it? You are NaN years old. Okay? When we first start writing programs, we won't be that concerned, but eventually we'll validate everything. So if you put in something that's non-numeric, or for age, I mean, I'm going to guess if you put a number that's 125, it probably, greater than 125, or less than 1, or less than 0, unless you're doing a thing with months. All right. The other thing is this one right here, an alert. First of all, that \n stands for new line. Means put please have a nice day on one line, then it's like you hit the enter key, and on the next line, you are that number of age years old. Does that make sense? The plus sign here, this is known as an overloaded variable because you use it both for addition, if you're adding, if what you have on both sides is a number, or concatenation. So I want to glue together UR plus the age plus years old. Does all that make sense? And I've got to take the variable here, and I can't put it if I put it in the double quotes, it would have said you are age years old. Does that make sense? All right, if we do run a PHP class, in PHP, you can actually put it inside of the double quotes. The other thing I didn't mention yet, just so you know, JavaScript could care less. You can use double quotes, or you can use single quotes, as long as you just, you're consistent with them. I'm going to recommend always use double quotes, because JavaScript and PHP are one of the few languages, or two of the few languages, where that's the case. In most languages, if you want to use a string, it's got to be double quotes. So I recommend that you just get used to doing it and putting it in double quotes right away. If you have a question, yeah.
The \n, does that have to be in the quotes, or does that be outside?
The question was the \n. If you leave it outside of the quotes, it won't work.
Okay.
No. It's called an escape character. So for instance, if I wanted to do this, let's say that instead of this, and I don't know if it works for some reason in this editor, but I'm going to try it anyway. I put a T in there. All right, it doesn't recognize it. That's supposed to be a tab. All right. And for some reason in JavaScript, it's never really realized the \T. You're going to see these when we go into, there's a whole bunch of them that are in your book. But \n is the one that you typically use all the time. It used to be if you put \a here. Remember back in the days when older terminals, when they had a bell on them, that would ring the bell. I had a student who used to write programs where he'd go up to other people's computers when they wouldn't log off during a break, and he would set it up. He was really an intelligent guy, but he would write an infinite loop where they'd come back, and if they pressed a certain key, that it would in an infinite loop, it would do that like an alert A, and it would just go, and people wouldn't know what they were doing wrong. I had a woman one day, she just literally was going nuts. And so I told her who did it and what he did, and she got even with him. All right. When you assign stuff, what they call an identifier here, that means it's something you're creating. I created age in that program, correct? That was a variable I created. I didn't create document. I didn't create write. I didn't create alert or parse int or prompt. So anything I create, those are called identifiers. Identifiers must follow these rules. Typically, they start with a letter. You can start them with a $sign, and in PHP, you must start your variable names with a $sign. But usually, most people who write JavaScript, they must start with a $sign. After the $sign, you can put numbers, but it can't start with a number. All right? You can't have spaces, so if I wanted to use the word tax rate, I couldn't have, for a variable name, tax space rate. What you typically do, and I think we've talked about this before, is you use camel casing, where you say tax rate. So when you combine words together, the first letter of the new word is uppercased and everything, so if this was my tax rate, it would look like this. Does that make sense? Because you are going to be expected to do that. All right, really from day one. And you can't use keywords. What are keywords? I think that's on the next page here. These are the JavaScript keywords on page 34 of your book. Some of these keywords will go over in here. Some of these keywords were just put in because they didn't want you to use them. All right? This is, in most programming languages, that's the ultimate four-letter word. Go to. All right? If you either yourself, if you ever know the old BASIC or GW BASIC, etc., all right, people use go-tos all the time. I always say this. This is basically, did I make this up? I don't know. Remember the old Roadrunner, Wile E. Coyote cartoons? And Wile E. Coyote is, man, he's caught the Roadrunner. And what happens? Because there's a big brick, huge boulder in front of him. So what does he do? All of a sudden, a magic can of paint appears. And he paints himself a door, and he opens the door, and then, boom, it disappears because the coyote runs into it. That's what people did with go-tos. You created what was called spaghetti code, where if you couldn't get your way out of something, you just said, go to here. So it's made in there as a reserved word because they don't want you to use it. You still can. All right, we'll talk about that in a later class, but it's highly discouraged. But some of these words that we'll go over, some of them, we'll talk about looping. We'll use a while loop. We'll use a for loop. We'll use a do while loop. So you can see that those particular words, we'll use an if statement. We'll use a switch statement. All right? And they mention here that typically people either use underscores or camel case. That's more prevalent out in industry. That's why I'm recommending that you do it that way, instead of my underscore tax underscore rate. All right, they talk about the on page 35, it says using the var keyword, and that's declaring and initializing. I already showed you that. And it's called the assignment operator. I already showed you that. All right. Don't do this. This to your instructor is unacceptable. See that in the blue up there, or gray? I want you to say var order number equals, in double quotes, R0218, double quote, semicolon, then on the next line, var sales total. So I want these as 3 lines. That's just sloppy programming. All right, there's no reason to do that. It's a little more work on your part, but it makes your program more self-documenting to do it that way. All right, that's what they show here on the next page. So, displaying variables, I already showed you the document.write. Modifying variables, you can change a variable at any time. So I can come into the program that we did right here, and I could say age equals this, just like we did. I can copy that code. Put it down here. So it's going to be in here twice. I understand that. So run it again. 25 says you're 25. Run it again. 66. You're now 66. You've changed the value. And you can do that in anything. It's worse than that. All right? And sorry, that's the other one that I did earlier. But what I'm going to show you right now is probably the worst case of how JavaScript's a bad language. What I'm going to show you, you can't do it in C#, you can't do it in ASP.NET, you can't do it in Java. You can do it in PHP. All right, many ways PHP and JavaScript are very similar to one another. But I can come down here. Okay, we set the age, right? Everybody sees that. But now I'm going to come in here and I'm going to say, I can't even spell my own name. So you can change the type of data that you put in there at any time. And it may not sound like a big thing. It's an unbelievably big thing for one reason. One of the reasons this is an interpreted language is so you can do things like that. So if I've got a variable that's called, I don't know, order cost, okay? And maybe if something is free, I don't want to set it to $0, to 0.00. I want to set it to the word free. I can do that. You can't do that in any of the other languages in this program here, other than that one. All right. Some people love that. Some people hate that. An expression is when you put stuff together. That's an expression. Okay? Now I'm going to tell you another rule that most books don't even say it anymore. Okay? I'm going to go back to this program. See where I've got all these semicolons? See that? I'm going to remove every one of them. Check for semicolons. There aren't any. Okay. Save. Run the program. And it still worked. It's very rare if you forget to put in a semicolon that your program won't work. All right. I require that you use semicolons where they're supposed to be used. Again, this language, PHP, if you don't put a semicolon in, it doesn't work. But this is the only language I know that's that forgiving with semicolons at the end of a line. So just get used to putting them in. Now, if you've got a program where you've got 50 things for semicolons and you put in 49, I probably won't see it anyway, to be honest with you. But just get used to, so any line that's an executable line of code, you put a semicolon at the end. Period. All right. Now, one thing you've got to realize, this is up on page 39 in the book. They're going to talk about events next. This is one of the hardest parts of JavaScript to understand is events. What the author has attempted to do in this chapter is to introduce you to everything you're going to be exposed to in other chapters in the book. Does that make sense? All right. So an event is something like this. Maybe you've seen this before. Okay? In fact, you've used events whether you realize it or not, but now we're going to programmatically use events. If I want to sit there and set it up, so if I take my mouse, which looks like the little arrow, And if I take my mouse and if I put it over a button, let's say it turns to a finger, all right? I do that with event handling. That's a mouse over event. I've changed what my mouse pointer looks like. So with event handling, you've got to look at it that the system is sitting there waiting for you to do something, and it'll respond to what you've done if you add code to make it respond. All right? So if I've got a click routine for a button and I don't put any code there, nothing happens when I click it. Nothing. All right? You say, well, what about the submit button that we had that we used we saw a little bit when we worked with forms in HTML. The reason that works when you can actually submit something is there is JavaScript behind the scenes that's running to make that work. All right. So an event this is on the test. An event is a circumstance monitored by JavaScript that your script can respond to. All right, so it's something that happens in a program that again, the program can respond to. Here's some of those events. You get a blur event. If you remember when we worked a little bit on forms before, if you tab from one field to another, or you leave one, you're on one field and you leave it and you go to another, a blur event takes place. You literally can write JavaScript code. So if I've got a form up here that asks you for 3 things, first name, last name, and age, just those 3 things. And then you click a button. Let's just say I put age first. Okay? And you're filling it out. You've got to put in a number for age, and it has to be between 1 and 125. I can put code in a blur event, so if you put in something illegal, you either leave it blank or non-numeric or less than 1 or greater than 125, and you click a button, I can send you right back to that field. I can do that. All right? Change is, if I want to, I can set it up so as you're typing into a text box, let's say I ask you for your salary, okay? And you put in there $45,000, and you put in 45,000, you accidentally fat finger, and instead of the last 0, you put in an O, not a 0, but a letter O. It'll break up, it'll blow up. I can set it up with a change event so that if I type in something non-numeric into a numeric field, it won't even accept it. You're going to learn how to do that. Click is typically for buttons, errors for error conditions, focus, if you want something to be active, if you want the mouse to go there, then it receives the focus. Key down when you press a key up when you release it. Load for when the thing loads. Here, right now there's a mouse over, there's a mouse out, mouse over, mouse out, etc. Reset, submit. Most of these new things that are down here, the touch stuff, those are for mobile devices. And you've got to program differently for mobile than you do, because typically, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't know of anybody I've ever seen in my life that walks around with a phone and has a mouse with it. All right, so there's totally different ways that you're responding to events. So here are some of they talk in here about different ways that you can do this. So you're going to learn this. All right. Now notice what this says. Just take it from the top. You know what this part is right here, this part that I'm putting the mouse over right now. That's going to create a submit button on your form. What this says is once you click the button, all right, put an alert in, and with that alert, have it say, thanks for your order, we appreciate your business. I'm going to grab this code right here, and it hasn't been letting me copy it, unfortunately. Copy. Let's see if it does. No. Yeah, great. Let's try it this way and see if it does. Control C. That worked. So I'm going to go in here. I'm not going to put this into my script tags. No, I'm not putting that in script tags. This is HTML. So I'm going to paste that in. Input type equals submit. And I'm saying once that's clicked, bring up an alert. And that alert should say, thanks for your order. We appreciate your business. Does all that make sense? So let's save it and let's try to run it. There's the button. I click it, there it is. That was done with JavaScript, all right? That was an on-click event. Most of these events that you just looked at, they're gonna have the word on in front of them. So click becomes on click, blur becomes on blur, etc. All right? The good news is, and one of the reasons we do it in this order, is now, I mean, you know I could just put a BR tag in there, but you know now how you'll be able to take something like that and use CSS and pretty it up. All right? So again, here on page 42, it looks like, these are different events. So for an anchor tag, these are the different events that it can respond to. For an image tag, etc. I'm not going to go through any of them, but you can put code in any of those. You typically don't go and write that code. The way I just showed you, this, pardon my French, that's a piss poor way of doing it. Can somebody tell me why that's a wrong way of coding? We talked about this earlier in class. Because you're putting JavaScript right into your HTML file. You don't do that. Now, I'm going to give you some code, and we're going to write some code. I'm going to write some code where, at times at least, I'm just going to put my JavaScript right in my HTML, because otherwise I have to bounce back and forth between two different files. Do you understand what I'm saying? You can do that, but the stuff you turn in, I want you to break it into two files. You know how to do it already, because you do it the same way the exact same way you did it for CSS. But now instead of removing style tags and putting it into another file, you remove script tags and put it into another file. Instead of having a .css extension, it has a .js extension. But you know how to do it already, all right? You're all intelligent people, and every one of you should be able to make that transition seriously with no problem, all right? So they talk a little bit more in here about, they explain to you what's going on. It's what I just said to you, okay? This right here, and I mentioned this to you before, you may or may not remember it, where it says get element by ID. That will probably be the most important part of this class. Anything that you put on a web page where you said ID equals anything, all right? We've always done that with CSS, right? You use the pound sign, etc. But if you want to manipulate that thing programmatically, it's get element by ID. Please notice the capitalization, it has to be like that. I may have mentioned this before, but most people write it when they first start writing and they put ID and they make the I capital and the D. Can't do that. Guess what it does then? Absolutely nothing. All right. What that does is it literally says, I want you to grab first name and I want to be able to manipulate it programmatically, but I'm calling it F name. What you can do with JavaScript, you can use a thing that's called inner HTML that we're going to talk about very shortly, where a lot of times I'll sit there and in my code, I'll put something like this, div. It may or may not have a class, I don't care. But there'll be nothing here other than this. So it's an empty div, nothing shows, correct? Nothing on your screen. However, you could use the inner HTML property and put whatever you want to put in there. So let's assume for a second that we're a 4-year institution. And one of the things that you're asked is, what year in school are you? All right? So Ethan does his and he puts down freshman. So he gets something that gets filled in that div because he's a freshman. All right? Drew puts sophomore, so he gets something that's put in there for a sophomore. So you can programmatically, based on input somebody has given you, fill up that any way you want to. And that's one of the things that we're going to get into. That's the interactivity. All right. Again, you wouldn't typically write like this. You can, but you typically wouldn't for the same reason I just mentioned before. They talk about structuring JavaScript code on page 45, and the idea is you should use tabbing, etc., and lay things out. If you don't, it'll still work, but it's harder for you to read, harder for you to maintain. Okay, hopefully that just makes sense to say that. Again, there's how you create an external file. You don't use the link tag. You do not use the link tag like you did in CSS. And what you'll forget to do, I forget to do it, everybody does. See how you say script source equal right there? You've got to put an ending script tag in there. You must, or it won't work. All right? Everybody forgets to do it now and then. All right. Believe it or not, we're almost finished with the chapter. So on page 50, down towards the bottom half of the page, the author talks about libraries. Libraries are filled with books typically, right? All right, most libraries today are, all right? And of course, I know there are online libraries, etc., but you get the idea. Code libraries are filled with routines or functions that you write. So let's say I wrote this really cool routine for my program on how to do some special kind of sorting, all right? And later, I go and I write another program where, boy, I could really use that routine. I put those routines in libraries, and then I'm able to bring them into my program, okay? And as it says, there are libraries that exist too. Node.js is a library, Backbone.js is a library, Knockout.js is a library, jQuery is a library, and they're just a bunch of built-in functions. We will talk a little bit in here about Modernizer. I don't know if they show it in here or not. There it is. That file right there, what they're saying is they're telling you to add a JavaScript file. What that file does is it says, hey, if somebody's using an old browser and you don't understand something that's in my program, okay, basically just ignore it. But don't let it break the program. Okay, so that what Modernizer is typically put in there for older versions. I know Drew had asked this before again about validating web pages. You know now how to validate an HTML page. You know now how to validate a CSS page. As I mentioned, there's no true validator for JavaScript. And think about why that's the case. If I ask you all to create a web page in here now, you can do it. And they're probably not all going to look exactly the same, but they'll look pretty darn similar, every one of them. If I ask you to code a guessing game, this is one of the things we're going to do maybe Monday, maybe Tuesday, I don't know, but we're going to do something as a class where it's going to be a simple thing. I'm going to ask you, we'll ask the user to guess a number between 1 and 100. And it'll tell them if they're too high, if they're too low, and then once they guess it, how many guesses it took, all right, type of an idea. The point is, I every time I write that, I used to write it and then I'd come in here with a hard copy and I type it in, and I thought the hell with it. And I go back and I realize that every time I retype it, I'm doing it differently. So there's really no way to validate that, because if Dominic writes his in some way and Brady writes it another way and Valerie writes it in another way, they're all probably equally correct. They give the same answer. But there are no true validators for this stuff. All right. They get into this, and this may or may not make any sense to you right now. Again, we're talking people who have old browsers. Everybody hear what I said? Old browsers. Typically, what people do is they take their actual JavaScript code. Can you see this right here in the blue or whatever color that is? Can you see this thing and this thing? All right. What that's saying is, in really old browsers, like people who literally were running Java or IE6 and earlier versions than that, what would happen is if they wouldn't have JavaScript available on their machine, not that it was, it literally wasn't available to that version of the browser. Then when you put this in here, the text itself would actually print. So on your screen, you'd see document.write, etc. This says, this is a different kind of XML comment, which says, hey, if that's in there, just treat it as a comment. And if that's too much, if that's too hard for you, what other people do is instead of this one, they just put in, what is it? I think they put in CSS comments. And instead of this one, they do this. And that should still work if you put in CSS comments like that. You can't put in JavaScript comments because then they're commented out. Yes, those are, that's what you want. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, you're right. If you put CSS, say it again. If you put HTML comments for this, that will work as well. All right, you see both. This is more new school, that's more old school. But people do it both ways. If you say, oh, I'm not even, do I have to do that? No. But what I'm telling you is you see that a lot in code that's out there. That's why I'm mentioning it to you. And the author, I give them credit, they're trying to give you good programming habits from the get-go. That's why they encourage you to do that. All right? Then on 54 and 55, they talk about how to validate your CSS. You've done that already. All right? Now, I'm going to tell you this. Take it for what you think it is or is not worth, okay? The summaries in this book are good. If you plan on reading the book, I would suggest you first spend 10 minutes and read the summary first. And then go back and read the book, because the summaries are good in this book. I think they're better than what we just had in the CSS book. I'm not going to go through the summaries. There's just not enough time. The other thing that's good about what's in this book are these key terms. All right? Because most of the terms in here, probably 3 out of 4, are pretty darn important terms. Then, after they go through the terms, they've got these little tests that you can take, and I believe, I'm not giving these, but I believe the answers to these are in the back of the book. All right? For these review questions, I'm almost positive they're in the back of the book. Then, starting on page 65, because I'm just about finished, starting on page 65, this is what I'm talking about. Every chapter will have 5 hands-on projects. And what I'm telling you is every time we get to that point, I'm going to say, how many people want to see me do number 1? Or do number 1 together? How many number 2? It's not always going to be the case that, oh, we'll pick number 5. That's the last one. It must be the hardest. Not always. And the ones in the first chapter are not very difficult. All right? So the last thing I will tell you is the rest of the period is yours for you to do with whatever you want to do with it. But we're here now. Okay, we're on today's the 21st. So if we look, what did we just do? We went through chapter 1. So that was what we wanted to do. Those were our objectives. All right? We spent most of our time on the differences between client and server side, the components of JavaScript, how to add JavaScript to a web page. Those 3. Okay? You are responsible for doing these. Literally, these are the ones you're going to use the files that I gave you for. You're going to add the JavaScript, okay, that they have in the book. Then, next week, notice Monday's a lab, Tuesday's a lab, Wednesday's a lab. Well, when that's not going to be exactly the case, Monday will be lab, all period. The first thing I will do on Monday is say, how many people would like to do number, and if you go, well, it's chapter 1, they were all simple, we can do them all. That's fine, then I won't do any of them. Then you'll have lab the entire period. It's fine with me. All right? Tuesday, same way. Wednesday, remember, I said you're already having a hands-on test next Thursday on chapter 1. And no one's complained, but I said, I'm going to take that hands-on and give it to you Wednesday. So you have all 4 hours on Thursday to do the written one. This will go here on Wednesday. All right? Questions on that? Okay, then let's take another break, and when we come back, let's do the test review now. All right? The what?
The hands-on in the back of the book that it's doing.
The Chapter 1 labs are due at the beginning of class. Let's see, because they should all be in here. It says due on day 43, and that is, of course, the days aren't on there anymore. Oh, yes, they are. They're over here. That is the ones that are in the chapter itself. The ones at the end of the chapter, where it says labs are due here, I think that's day 46. The ones that are always the earliest, they're the ones that are right in the book for which you have the student files. And the other ones will be due later. But you typically in here, 8 chapters, 8 weeks, we'll try to give you at least a couple lab days per week. All right. So like I said, let's make it 10 after 10. We'll spend about 10 to 15 minutes and we'll go through the complete review of the test. For the test.